Hey now, good morning, BASW staff, clients, and friends join us for Classical Tuesday. You know how we like to do it. Yesterday we looked at Field of Dreams, your film scoring assignment, so get that into me. Today would be nice, and then we'll see your results for Friday, that very cool fantasy baseball fairy tale movie. Today we're going to talk about a composer, and then also really try to understand what he was really famous for. I mean, famous for writing some great music, of course, but how did he write that music? And we're gonna take a different approach, a little bit of a different approach. But I mean, why wouldn't it be fun? It should be fun. We'll try to make it fun. Today we're going to be looking at the great composer Rimsky-Korsakov. Rimsky-Korsakov, Russian, right? No way he couldn't be. Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, no way he couldn't be Russian. Really one of the most brilliant and composers and orchestrators. We're going to talk about orchestration a little bit today. In all of classical music, in the history of classical music, really steeped in Russian music, in Russian folk music, and very bright sounding, melodic sounding music. There's one piece in particular that I know you know that he composed in 1900. Yeah, that's Harry James playing it, but obviously that's in the 40s. He wrote it in about 40 years earlier, in 1900. This is The Flight of the Bumblebee, right? You guys already know Rimsky-Korsakov. Isn't that cool that we know these people already? So now we can put a name to it. This was from his opera, The Tale of the Tsar Sultan, it's supposed to sound like a bee, and it does, right? So Rimsky-Korsakov's really great. We'll take a look at his life and then take a look at orchestration. So what he did was make orchestration more of an art, and we'll kind of more of an art form where Bach had keyboard counterpoint stuff going on in the 1700s. And you get Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven in the classical period. They're orchestrating, of course, but it doesn't become so much of an art form until the 19th century, until Romanticism. And Rimsky-Korsakov is right in the middle, so we have to have our timeline. Where is that timeline? Where is it? Oh, there it is. There's our timeline. So he's born in 1844, dies in 1908. So he sees a lot, but he's mostly going on 19th century, which is Romanticism. Wagner mostly, right? We've talked about Wagner. So he's going to get a lot of influence from Liszt, who we looked at. Liszt is just right before him. He's also going to be friends with Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky's a Russian composer, so they're both Russian. And then he's going to influence Debussy and Ravel with orchestration. He's going to influence a lot of people. He's going to influence Stravinsky because Stravinsky was his student, and so he taught Stravinsky a lot about Russian folk music and Russian orchestration. So Rimsky is born in East St. Petersburg. So let's go over there to a Russian noble family, a pretty wealthy family, born into it, and started taking piano lessons and composition lessons when he was about 10, but was like a lot of other composers that we've talked about, very into other arts, not just music, very into literature, and we'll see the influence of how literature and that stuff's going to influence one of his most famous pieces. So he studied music. He didn't really have formal training. He wrote a lot of music, and then he didn't really know what this kind of meant. And so he starts hanging around other composers, part of the Five, they call it, and with other composers we haven't talked about, but Mussorgsky and people like that. And he becomes a really excellent teacher, and he trains himself by reading textbooks and getting a good classical education, so he becomes a really good teacher, and like I said, taught Stravinsky, and then he went back to rewrite a lot of his earlier work now that he was trained in some way. So it shows you we can always go back, and it's good to move forward, but also go back and use the new tools that we have. Just like when I showed you the good, the bad, the ugly a few weeks ago, I wanted you to see how far you've come along. So it's good to go back and see the world with new eyes. What do you think about that? So in 1871, he's 27, and he becomes a professor of practical composition and instrumentation or orchestration at St. Petersburg Conservatory. And then he starts hanging out and learning from Tchaikovsky, who's a little bit older than him and pretty well established. We did a class on Tchaikovsky. By 1907, he's pretty sick and has a bad heart condition, so dies. So, but left a lot of music around. So one of the things, I've talked about orchestration a little bit before. It sounds like a long word, but really it's mostly, people use it as arranging. In pop songs, in musical theater, you hire an arranger. And what is the arranger? It does just exactly what it sounds like. He's going to take the melody, take the bass, he's going to arrange, or she, and assign it to different instruments. That's all that it is. Because if you think about it, if you have a C chord, you have C, E, G, that's the chord. And if you have 10 guys in a room, or 80 with an orchestra, who's going to play the C, and who's going to play the E, and who's going to play the G? And are they all going to play at the same time? This is how the basic, how do you assign, and if they all played at the same time, who plays the top one, who plays the bottom one? This is very elementary orchestration. But just think about that for a second. And so it's the same way where, the Beatles were in the room with a bunch of people, and George Martin would orchestrate using the strings for Yesterday, and so Rimsky-Korsakov is going to take really the art of orchestration to a whole new level, including writing a book that people still read today on the techniques of orchestration. So you have to decide. Now, there's certain rules about orchestration. There's octaves, there's doublings. A flute can't play the same range as a bass, right? So they can't play that same note. They can both play a C, but it's going to be different octaves, right? So it's up to the orchestrator to write correctly, because if you're a flute player and if you get a piece of music that is written for bass, you're going to say, hey, I can't read this, I can't play this, you don't know what you're doing, so give me something I can look at. So the arranger, the orchestrator, has to say, oh, okay, well, let me transpose that, let me put that up to it. But then if you think about it, if they all play a C, if you have 20 people playing a C, is that interesting? Not really. I mean, it's how do you get color? We're only talking about color and orchestration color. And so let's look at Scheherazade. This is his most famous work. It's an example of fairy tale and folk subjects that he wrote. He writes this in 1888. So this is still Romanticism. Impressionism is starting too, right? Because Ravel and Debussy are going to be very influenced by Rimsky-Korsakov. So this is based on 1001 Nights, or the Arabian Nights, of course. And this thing is so clever and so beautiful. So the name Scheherazade refers to the main character Scheherazade of 1001 Nights. Before we listen to it, let's listen to the piano version of this, because this is what composers do and orchestrators do. If you have it on piano, that's great. Now you have to transcribe it, transpose it, anything to the orchestra. So how do you do that? So I want to play you first just a little bit of the piano Scheherazade, because this is how most composers start. You write it at the piano first, and then the daunting task is, okay, how do I make the whole orchestra play this? But I want you to hear the piano first. So you have all the notes, right? I mean, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous, but we know it based, the Scheherazade is mostly, it's an orchestral suite, so it's for the orchestra. How does one translate that to the orchestra? You have your flutes, you have oboes, you have clarinets, you have all that stuff. And he's going to do this in a way that's really colorful and beautiful. So let's just see what it sounds like actually with the orchestration. Changes the whole mood, right? It's still a beautiful piece, but without orchestration, it's a whole different world. It's now you have a piano versus a full orchestra, and I've always thought, at least with my music, when I write music, I like it, on the piano. I have to write it on the piano first, but then if I'm not able to orchestrate it, that's where at least for me, I'm just talking personally, that's where I add my personality to it, a little bit more of my personality. I guess the personality can be in the melodies, of course, but without the orchestration, it's not its own thing, because you can really just write, you can write a thing with a 3-chord song on the piano, and that sounds fine. But then how do you orchestrate that 3-chord song on the piano to sound different, to sound like it's not any other band playing? That's one of the challenges and one of the beauties of how wonderful music is composed. There's endless possibilities, and we talked about orchestration with, almost in every class, but with Rushmore, Mark Mothersbaugh used the mandolin, so that's orchestration. That's a different color all of a sudden. So it's solo piano music is well and good, and it's beautiful, but then when you can bring in other instruments, that's orchestration. And that's color, and that's more interest, and that's beautiful, and that's all these different things that we kind of just take for granted sometimes, because also there's dynamics, something loud, something soft. You also as the orchestrator have to know that if you have really loud brass, that's not going to be good for a very soft section, because brass players play loud. So you have to know all the families of the orchestra for sure, and you have to know so it's a very technical thing, and obviously we're not going to orchestrate anything, but I want you to understand the art of orchestration, how much goes into dynamics, range, and how do you get it to sound colorful and beautiful like Rimsky-Korsakov did. So Scheherazade, one of my favorite pieces, great composer, so many good things we could talk about, but I just wanted to tell you a little bit about his life and about how the art of orchestration. Okay, so that's all I got. Said it all. Love you guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, bye.